Hey guys, tonight we drift back through time, way back, to a village where the sky is a milky grey, the ground is perpetually damp, and your morning wake-up call is not a rooster, but the flatulent quack of 20 ducks you're personally responsible for. You, dear listener, are a medieval housewife, and you've got two jobs today. Herd those ducks and brew enough beer to keep your family, your neighbours, and the church mildly tipsy and miraculously alive. The fog clings to the thatched rooftops like an old shawl, and the air smells like smoke, wet hay, and something faintly sour, probably your boots. You rub the sleep from your eyes with hands already crusted in yesterday's flour. Your shift begins before sunrise, always. No alarm clocks, no snooze button, just the grunt of your husband stirring in the loft above and the muffled thunk of a duck bumping into the barn wall. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're settling in, drop a comment. Where are you listening from, and what time is it right now? Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You pull on a rough wool apron, still stained from last week's blackberry spill, wrap a scarf around your head, and swing open the crooked wooden door. Cold air bites your cheeks and your breath fogs instantly. Outside, the ducks await, some already waddling aimlessly, others still huddled under a crooked cart like hungover gamblers. You trudge toward them, feet sinking into soft muck that never seems to dry. You whistle, a low rhythmic chirrup passed down from your grandmother. They respond with a chaotic shuffle. You try to keep them corralled near the barley field, can't have them trampling seedlings or pooping in the mash tub again. Your neighbours are out too. Agnes, 3 cottages down, is scolding her youngest for licking icicles off the pigsty roof. Joan is already scrubbing laundry in a frozen trough. You nod, exchange grunts of mutual exhaustion, and keep moving. As the ducks settle along the edge of the barley rows, some pecking lazily at weeds, others flopping dramatically, you finally breathe. It's not peace exactly, but it's a manageable kind of madness. Your hands go to your hips, your eyes to the sky. The clouds are still smeared with grey, but there's a promise of light coming. Maybe. Your mind shifts to the beer you need to brew today. Not a task to be taken lightly. In your village, beer isn't just a beverage, it's liquid bread, safer than water, thicker than soup, and often the only thing standing between you and scurvy. Yes, even the children drink it. No, it's not the kind of thing you'd serve at a party, unless you're into medieval flatulence competitions, and brewing it, that's an art. And a science, and a gamble, and depending on the weather, maybe a religious ritual. You head back inside, dodging a particularly enthusiastic duck, and start your prep. First stop, checking your barley. The sacks you hauled last market day are lined up under the eaves. You poke one open and peer inside. Golden grains, dry and full, ready for malting, except for that one wriggling lump, probably a mouse. You sigh. It's always a mouse. You'll have to clean and soak the grains soon, but first, you light the hearth. The coals from last night are still smouldering. Bless them. You feed them with a few twists of straw and blow gently. The fire responds, crackling to life, illuminating the soot-streaked walls and casting long shadows across your cluttered little kitchen. Above the hearth hangs your mash tub, an old copper cauldron blackened with use, dented from the time you dropped it on your foot, and faintly sticky from last week's honey experiment. You run your fingers along its rim. It's warm, familiar. Like a cranky old pet. While the fire builds, you chop kindling. One log slips and whacks your shin. You don't swear out loud, but internally, a litany of ancient curses you wouldn't repeat in church. Outside, the ducks are settling into their rhythm, honking at nothing, flapping their wings like drunken angels. You know most of them by name: Floss, Featherbutt, Little King Harold, he's a diver, and Old Agnes, not to be confused with human Agnes. They'll wander near the barley and keep the slugs at bay. Good ducks, mostly. Historians still argue whether medieval housewives trained ducks deliberately to protect grain stores, or whether it was simply a happy accident involving laziness and leftover crusts. Either way, your ducks earn their keep, except for Harold, who prefers to scream at firewood. By mid-morning, your kitchen smells of damp straw, old ashes, and barley dust. You've managed to wrangle the ducks, start the fire, and mentally prepare for the day's brew. You haven't even had breakfast, unless you count licking honey off your fingers, and then, as you're hauling the first bucket of water from the backyard well, carefully avoiding the spot where the path dips into ankle-deep sludge, it happens. A duck stampede. Loud, chaotic, flappy. They're running, wings half extended, quacking like the sky's falling. You spin around, bucket sloshing, and catch sight of two stray mongrel dogs tearing across the yard, tails wagging, ears flapping, in full pursuit of your prize duck, Featherbutt. Your foot slides, your arms flail, the bucket arcs, and you fall. Backwards, into the mud, water goes everywhere. One dog veers, snatches a duck feather, and sprints away in victory. The other just licks your face. You lie there for a second, looking up at the pale sky, feeling cold water soak through your dress. You exhale slowly. This is the glamorous life of a medieval alewife. Tomorrow you tell yourself you'll train those ducks better. Maybe even build a fence. Maybe. But for now, you squelch to your feet, retrieve your empty bucket, and start again. Section 2. You make it back to the cottage, wet to the knees, one duck feather stuck in your sleeve like a badge of honor. The ducks are mostly back in place, some still slightly traumatized, others completely unbothered. Featherbutt is shaking herself off like she fought off the dogs herself. Little King Harold is on the roof again. As usual, you haul the barley sacks indoors one by one, muttering to yourself as your arms protest every step. Each sack is heavier than it has any right to be, stitched with fraying twine and labelled in your own shorthand, good, questionable, and the one that smells weird. You set them beside the hearth to warm up. Moisture is the enemy, unless, of course, you're sprouting them on purpose. More on that later. The ducks are still quacking, this time in the tone that says they've discovered something new and potentially edible. Probably one of your socks. Inside, the fire crackles with more enthusiasm now. The warmth creeps into your bones, soothing the chill that never fully leaves your toes. You strip off your outer apron, now splattered with mud and duck prints, and hang it by the door. Underneath, your shift is only mildly damp. A win, by medieval standards. Before brewing begins, you indulge in a rare few moments of quiet. You stir a pot of porridge left on the edge of the hearth overnight, oats, turnips, and a pinch of salt. You eat standing, scooping it from the pot with a horn spoon, staring blankly into the fire like some kind of barley philosopher. As you chew, there's a knock at the door, 3 quick taps, 1 long. You sigh. That rhythm can only mean one person, your neighbour, Margaret. You open the door to find her red-faced and breathless, carrying a lopsided basket. "I brought hops," she announces, uninvited, already stepping inside. "And something else. You don't use hops. You prefer bitter herbs, bog myrtle, maybe a bit of yarrow, like your grandmother did." Hops are a newfangled thing, and you're not entirely sure they're not just dried frog legs with branding. Still, Margaret dumps the basket on your table. Along with the hops, there's a fist-sized wedge of hard cheese and a tiny clay figurine that looks suspiciously like St. Cuthbert if he had a duckbill. "Also," she adds, eyeing your barley, "Joan said she saw you at the barley stall last week. Said you haggled the price down by cursing under your breath." You blink. "I did no such thing," Margaret shrugs. "Well, you are the one with the talking ducks. It's not worth arguing. Everyone in the village believes at least one weird thing about you, that you put onion skins in your beer, that you once yelled at a bishop, that your ducks are possessed. All technically true depending on your angle." Margaret picks up a scoop of barley, inspects it, and nods. "This is the good stuff. We should get grinding." And just like that, you're not alone anymore. The two of you haul a portion of the barley to the quern, a hand-turned grinding stone that lives in the corner like a retired war hero. You take turns spinning it, listening to the soft crunch of grain beneath stone. The rhythm is hypnotic. Around and around, crunch and creak, punctuated only by the occasional duck pecking at the door. As you grind, Margaret talks. She always talks. About the weather, about her husband's suspicious rash, about the alewife in the next town who started mixing her mash with nettles and now claims to see angels. You nod, grunt, and occasionally add a It's just enough to keep the conversation going without encouraging a full-on theology debate. Grinding takes time. A lot of it. By the end, your arms feel like porridge and your neck is permanently tilted to the left, but you've got a respectable pile of ground malt, soft and golden, with that unmistakable sweet earthy smell. Margaret sniffs it. "Smells like Tuesday." You don't ask what that means. With the barley ground, you set it aside. Now it's time for the real magic, or at least the part that involves water, patience, and increasingly bad posture. But before that, the ducks need checking. Again. You step outside to find that someone, probably Harold, has led the entire flock across the path and into the neighbour's garden. Again, they're now waddling between rows of onions, pecking gleefully at worms and leaving behind what might generously be called fertilizer. You clap your hands and start herding them back, muttering apologies to no one in particular. It's a process that involves waving your arms, stomping strategically, and speaking in a tone that would confuse modern dog trainers. Eventually they return to their patch near the barley field, only mildly insulted. You head back inside, trying not to think about the onion peels now stuck to your boots. Margaret's still there, pouring a mug of small beer, yesterday's batch, into a cracked wooden cup. She takes a sip, makes a face, and says, "Tastes like it saw God and didn't like what it found." You shrug. "It'll do." The two of you sit for a moment, ducks honking in the distance, fire murmuring behind you. It's not glamorous, it's not clean, and it's not quiet, but it's life. Your life. And for now, it's enough. Outside, the sun finally begins to break through the clouds, casting pale yellow light over your soggy little village. Margaret stands, drains her cup, and stretches. "Same time tomorrow?" she asks. You nod, already thinking about the next step, the soaking, the malting, the unpredictable science of fermentation. And the ducks, always the ducks, she leaves whistling something tuneless and cheerful. You watch her go, then return to your barley, your cauldron, and your chaos. The grind continues. Section 3. The sun is barely overhead now, though calling it sun might be generous. It's more of a smudge in the sky, like a candle seen through foggy glass. You've warmed your fingers, your fire is healthy, and your barley flour is waiting in a tidy, flour-dusted bowl that already has 3 duck prints on it. Next step, fetch the water. You grab your buckets, wooden, slightly warped, but still holding more water than they leak, and head out to the stream. It's a bit of a walk, just far enough to be annoying, just close enough to make you think, maybe I'll carry 2 at once. You always regret that decision. Your boots squish into the damp earth, and the path is riddled with puddles that never seem to dry. The ducks follow you at first, assuming food is involved. They waddle behind like feathery shadows, quacking softly until they realize it's the boring errand and not the one involving grubs. One by one they peel off, except for Harold, who continues dramatically as if he's your bodyguard. The stream is slow and brown, ribboning through the pasture like a lazy worm. You kneel at the edge and dip your buckets in. The water is freezing. It seeps into your sleeves and makes you clench your teeth, but it's clean enough, at least cleaner than the barrel rainwater back home, which currently contains a drowned beetle and, you're pretty sure, a scrap of shoe. You pause there for a moment, kneeling beside the water, breathing in the cold, damp scent of soil and moss. The world is quiet here, just for a beat, then a splash. You whip around to see Harold, now knee-deep in the stream, flapping his wings and quacking like he's discovered Atlantis. You lurch forward to grab him, one hand still gripping the bucket, and of course you slip. You don't fall in entirely, just enough for your elbow to plunge in and your dignity to take another hit. "You absolute nuisance," you mutter, hauling Harold out of the shallows. He blinks at you like he just saved you from drowning. You fill the second bucket with one hand while holding the wet duck under your arm like a sack of flour. The walk back is longer, heavier, wetter. One bucket sloshes onto your skirt, the other digs into your shoulder. Harold wriggles periodically like he regrets his life choices but refuses to admit it. When you return to your cottage, you drop the buckets just inside the door and let Harold loose. He shakes, preens, and then immediately poops on your threshold. He is, at best, a chaotic neutral. The buckets are full, your sleeves are dripping, and your fire needs stoking. You dump the water into the large cauldron and wipe your hands on the least disgusting part of your apron. Time to soak the grain. You mix in the barley flour you ground with Margaret, stirring with a large wooden paddle that's older than your marriage. The mixture thickens fast, turning into a paste that smells like warm cereal and damp basements. It's oddly comforting. The ducks crowd around the open door now, curious. You toss them a handful of grain husks and they descend like feathery piranhas. You keep stirring, careful to avoid clumps. Your arms burn. This part always feels like stirring cement with a broom handle. A knock at the door. You groan softly. If it's another neighbour asking for just a cup of starter wort, you might brew something poisonous on principle, but it's not a neighbour. It's your cousin Edith holding a small child on one hip and a bundle of dried herbs in the other. "I heard you're brewing again," she says with a smirk. "Thought you might want some of this." She thrusts the bundle at you. You take it. It smells complex. "What is it?" she shrugs. "Something I found growing near the chapel. The chickens don't like it." You stare at her. "I thought it might add depth," she adds, already stepping inside and plopping the child down beside the hearth. The kid immediately starts chewing on your kindling pile. You put the herbs on a shelf, far away from everything else, and remind yourself to look them up in your grandmother's herbal. If you can find the page without duck dropping stuck to it. The mash thickens as it heats. You stir and eventually let it rest. The whole room smells like hot porridge, wood smoke and mild panic. The ducks settle at the doorway, watching, waiting, judging. This is the part of the process that requires faith and patience, both of which you have in inconsistent supply. You take the resting time to sweep the floor again and shoo out a duck that somehow snuck in under your skirt without you noticing. This is not the first time. It won't be the last. You check the mash. It's ready, thick, steaming, and smelling vaguely like warm bread and wet wool. You'll leave it to settle before straining, later. Right now, you need a moment to breathe. So you step outside into the weak sun and the constant duck orchestra, and you stand still. Just for a minute, you think about how every day blends into the next, how every batch of beer is the same and also completely different. How you've learned to tell the difference between a good ferment and a bad one by the way your kitchen smells at midnight. How brewing keeps you grounded in a world where roofs collapse, harvests fail, and sometimes your brother gets excommunicated for arguing with a statue. You think about the ducks, how they follow you, annoy you, make you laugh. Historians still argue whether medieval women brewed out of necessity or out of a sense of ritualized control over the chaos of daily life. You think it's probably both. You head back inside, wipe your hands on your apron, and pick up your stirring spoon again. Time to keep going. Section 4. The mash is resting and your arms are grateful. Outside, the ducks are settling into their afternoon stupor, half of them napping in a pile like a feathered beanbag, the other half squabbling over a turnip peel. Inside, it's warm, muggy even. Steam rises from the cauldron in thick spirals that fog up the little window panes and soften the world into a watercolor blur. It's time to begin malting. Now, technically, this part should have started a few days ago, but let's be honest, you were busy chasing a duck out of your barley bin and trying not to scream when the village reeve asked for just one more jug of your last batch. So you're running a little behind. That's normal. Malting is simple in theory. Soak the barley grains, let them sprout, then dry them. In practice, it's like babysitting something that doesn't cry, but does smell a bit like feet. You haul a smaller sack of dry barley into the pantry, a cool, dark alcove behind your kitchen that also stores onions, dried herbs, 2 suspicious jars labelled pig teeth, and a small shrine to St. Arnold, the patron of beer. He's fashioned out of wood and has one eye mysteriously painted blue. Sometimes, you whisper to him when a batch starts going sideways. You think he likes the attention. You spread the barley out in a wide, shallow basket and splash it with clean water from your earlier stream run. The grains glisten, swelling as they soak. You'll need to turn them several times a day so they sprout evenly and don't get mouldy. Speaking of mould, there's some debate about what exactly counts as too mouldy in a medieval pantry. Historians still argue whether the faint white fuzz you occasionally spot on older batches was considered dangerous or simply added depth to the final brew. You prefer not to dwell on that. You run your hands through the damp barley, feeling the weight and slickness of it. Soon, you'll start seeing tiny rootlets pushing out, each one a sign that the starch inside is beginning to convert. It's like a slow, sleepy miracle, unfolding under the weight of time and moisture and soft, filtered light. You cover the basket with a thin cloth and place it near the back wall where it's coolest. Then you check the one you started 3 days ago, a golden carpet of sprouting barley, soft to the touch, smelling faintly of green things and basement corners. You grin. This is the magic that no one sees. The part of brewing that feels like gardening in miniature. You're not just making drink, you're coaxing transformation from dry grain and dark water. You scoop the sprouted barley into a fresh sack and prepare to dry it. Which means it's kiln time. You step outside to your little outbuilding, a crumbling stone lean-to with a chimney that leans to the left like it's eavesdropping. Inside, the drying kiln waits. It's nothing fancy, a raised grate of slats over a fire pit stacked with firewood, ash, and the occasional mouse nest. You crouch and start the fire with flint and steel, muttering your usual string of prayers, warnings, and whispered threats to the logs. Eventually a spark catches. You coax it into a flame, then a crackle, then a low roar that begins to warm the stone walls. You spread the sprouted barley over the grate in a thin, even layer. The heat rises, warm and slightly smoky. Soon the grains will dry and roast, transforming into malt. It smells incredible, sweet and toasty, like cereal mixed with firewood and the faintest hint of caramel. You breathe it in, sighing even as the smoke stings your eyes. Outside, children are laughing. Someone's goat screams in the distance. You sit on an upturned bucket and wait, occasionally stirring the malt with a wooden paddle to keep it from burning. A duck wanders into the doorway, then wanders right back out, unimpressed. As you stir, you hum an old song, one your grandmother used to sing about St. Bridget turning water into beer during a famine. No one knows all the words anymore, but the tune lingers, passed down with flour-dusted fingers and half-remembered lyrics. Margaret claims there's a verse about ducks, but you're pretty sure she made that up. Once the grains are dry enough to crack between your teeth, but not so toasted that they turn bitter, you scoop them into a fresh sack. Your hands are sticky, your face is smudged with ash, and your apron smells like a campfire. You close the kiln door and carry the sack back inside, careful not to trip over the cluster of ducks who have taken up residence on your doorstep like grumpy little sentries. Back in the kitchen, you store the malt on a high shelf. Tomorrow you'll grind it again, this time finer, for flavour and fermentability. But for now, you wipe your hands, pour yourself a weak ale from yesterday's batch, and lean against the hearth. The fire pops. A duck sneezes. You sip. There's a kind of peace in this process. Not silence, there's never silence, but peace, in the sense that things are moving as they should. Grain becomes malt, water becomes beer. Ducks become, well, slightly soggy companions. You think again about the stories you've heard, how some women used hot stones to roast their malt in open baskets, while others swore by drying it in their bread ovens after baking day. Every region, every cottage had its quirks. Some even flavoured the malt with ashes from sacred fires or herbs gathered under a full moon. You tried that once. The result was undrinkable, and your cousin had vivid dreams about frogs for a week. You glance at your pantry door. The barley is soaking. The malt is dried. The ducks are accounted for, more or less. Tomorrow you'll mash. Tomorrow you'll brew. But for now, you rest. You pull up a stool by the hearth, let the warmth seep into your bones, and sip your ale. It's not perfect, it never is, but it's yours. Section 5. You wake the next morning to the unmistakable smell of singed wool and the equally unmistakable sound of ducks arguing with your laundry, again. Your hearth fire burned a little too long overnight, and a scrap of cloth left too close to the embers has curled into a blackened crisp. Nothing catastrophic, just enough to start your day with that perfect combination of panic and resignation. You flap it out the door, coughing on the ash. The ducks scatter like guilty children, feathers flying, beaks full of stolen laundry. You can't help but laugh. You haven't had coffee, because coffee doesn't exist yet, but you are already vibrating with the kind of focused chaos that only medieval brewing can bring, because today you mash the dried malt from yesterday, roasted to golden brown perfection, waits on the high shelf. You bring it down with both hands, trying not to notice the fine coating of dust or the spider that skitters across the sack. You make a mental note to add spider-proof the pantry to your already overflowing to-do list. The water in your cauldron is already warm from the banked coals. You stoke the fire gently, add fresh wood, and get it properly simmering. Then comes the fun part, mashing in. You pour the crushed malt into the steaming water, stirring vigorously with a wooden paddle that's nearly as tall as you. The mixture thickens quickly into a porridge-like consistency. It's heavy, sticky, and absolutely smells like warm bread. If that bread had spent the night in a smoky tavern. You stir and stir and stir some more. This is where brewing becomes a test of endurance. Your arms ache, your back twinges. But you can't stop. The mash needs constant movement to ensure the starches convert into sugars. Otherwise, you're just making hot barley soup. Margaret stops by mid-morning, poking her head through the window like an over-curious goose. "Still alive?" she calls. "Need a break?" I brought onions. You blink sweat from your eyes. Only if they're pickled. She disappears and returns moments later with a cloth bundle. You don't even ask what else might be in there. She tosses you a pickled onion and watches you chew with the bemused expression of someone who's just witnessed a minor miracle. You know, she says, leaning on your windowsill, Joan's batch soured last week. Whole thing turned to vinegar. She says it's the wind direction. You grunt. Or maybe the fact she washes her mash tun with pond water. Margaret snorts. Historians will argue about that someday. You mark my words, and she's not wrong. There is debate, in your time and centuries to come, over what precisely causes a mash to succeed or fail. Some swear by temperature, others by timing. Still others by muttering Latin at the cauldron when no one's looking. You personally suspect it's about 60% technique and 40% the attitude of your ducks. The mash bubbles gently now, steam rising in fragrant clouds. You pause to sniff. It smells sweet like barley candy and wet bread dough. A good sign. You ladle a bit into a clay cup, blow on it, and take a careful sip. Sweet, smooth, promising. You grin. Step 1, a success. Now comes the straining. This is where it gets medieval. You don't have cheesecloth, that's for monasteries and wealthy folk with nothing better to do. What you do have is an old wool cloak from your late uncle, washed more times than you can count, and repurposed specifically for this step. You line a large wooden tub with it, folding it carefully to avoid gaps. The ducks gather around like beer inspectors, peering in with critical eyes. You pour the mash through the cloak slowly. The hot liquid seeps through, golden and fragrant, leaving behind a pulpy barley sludge. The wort, the precious sugary liquid you'll boil next, collects below. You wring the cloth gently to extract every last drop. It drips steadily, the sound oddly soothing. A few ducks fall asleep. You pause halfway through to scratch at your scalp. You're fairly sure there's barley in your hair, possibly even a sprout. The straining takes time and it's not glamorous. You're kneeling, elbow deep in hot mash, your sleeves rolled up, your hair sticking to your forehead, but it's also meditative. You think about your grandmother's stories, how she'd strain her mash through dried reeds or even sand in desperate times, how one village 2 days east swears by straining through moss, how another uses linen stolen from a deceased uncle's funeral shroud. That one caused a scandal. You glance down at your wool cloak and shrug. At least it's clean. Mostly. Once the straining is done, you carefully lift the tub and transfer the wort into your cauldron again. The fire is ready. The boil is next. You sit back on your heels, breath heavy, apron damp, hands steaming from the heat. Margaret is still there, now sitting cross-legged on a log, peeling an onion with a tiny knife. You gonna add bog myrtle again? She asks. You nod. And rosemary. Maybe a pinch of sage. She squints. Sage? That's church herb. You raise an eyebrow. Only if the priest gets there first, she cackles. You'll add herbs once it boils. For now you watch the fire, listen to the ducks doze, and breathe in the scent of progress. The sun creeps across the thatch rooftops, casting long rays through your kitchen window. Your hands ache. Your back is a knot. But the wort glows amber in the cauldron, steam dancing in the sunlight. It's going to be a good batch. You can feel it. Section 6. The wort begins to boil with a low rolling sound like distant thunder muffled through velvet. You lean over the cauldron, squinting through the steam. The surface bubbles with slow intent, sending up little pockets of sweetness and heat that burst with a soft blop. It's mesmerizing, in a dangerous sort of way. You back up a step. The last time you got too close during a boil, you caught a faceful of wort steam and smelled like roasted barley for 2 days. Not entirely unpleasant, but not great for your romantic prospects either. Now is the time to add your herbs. You reach for your dried bundles, carefully strung up near the pantry where the ducks can't reach. You pluck down the rosemary first, sharp, fragrant, stubborn. Next, a sprig of bog myrtle, brittle and grey-green, smelling vaguely like pepper and marshes. You crush them between your palms to wake up the oils and toss them into the boil. The scent shifts immediately. It sharpens, darkens, goes deeper. A rich earthiness fills the room. If you close your eyes, it almost smells like the edge of the forest after a thunderstorm. Warm, wet bark. Stone. Moss. And somewhere under it all, fire. You stir with the long wooden spoon, watching the herbs swirl and dance like leaves in a cauldron of tea made for giants. Outside, the ducks erupt into sudden, angry chatter. You look up just in time to see old Agnes flapping her wings dramatically at a passing goat who dared to investigate the barley pile. You sigh. "Margaret," she appears in the doorway with a slice of turnip in her mouth. "I told you that goat has no respect." "She's eating my firewood again." Margaret shrugs. "Maybe she's cold." You grab a broom and swat at the goat until it lumbers off, leaving behind a small trail of chewed kindling and what could only be described as judgmental poop. Back inside, you find the boil holding steady. You taste a drop from the stirring spoon, blowing on it first. It's hot, scald your tongue hot, but good. Bitter from the herbs, sweet from the malt, balanced, like the best ones are. This stage is crucial. Boiling sanitizes the wort, well, mostly, and helps release the flavors of the herbs. It also reduces the liquid slightly, concentrating the sugars that the yeast will feast on later. Without this step, you'd be fermenting flavored swamp water. Not ideal. You add a pinch of sage, just to provoke Margaret. She narrows her eyes. "That's risky," you smile. "It's experimental. Last time you experimented, you set your eyebrows on fire. That was different. That was honey ale." She shudders. "We don't speak of the honey ale." You stir gently, breathing in the scent, lost in the rhythm. Steam curls around your face, softening the world, blurring the lines between the hearth, the ducks, the woman peeling turnips by your door. Everything slows. Then your aunt bursts in. "Is that rosemary I smell?" she demands without greeting. You turn slowly. "Yes," she sniffs. "Too much. You'll scare off the yeast." You blink. "The yeast can't smell." She folds her arms. "It knows." You nod politely. There's no winning against an aunt in full opinion mode. She proceeds to list every beer-related disaster in family history, most of which involve distant cousins and mysterious rashes. While she lectures, you keep stirring, adjusting the fire, watching the boil rise and fall like breath. You remember a tale your grandmother told about a woman whose beer never boiled over, not once in 40 years. They said she made a deal with a forest spirit who lived in her chimney. You always suspected the real reason was that she had excellent timing and no children, because if there's one truth in medieval brewing, it's this: something will go wrong. Sometimes the boil gets too wild and you lose half the wort to the fire. Sometimes the ducks get inside and peck at the malt. Once, a man in the next village dropped his wedding ring into the brew and decided to bottle the batch anyway. They called it Union Ale. It gave people dreams of weddings, and occasionally night sweats. Boiling is the moment when everything feels most alive and most likely to explode. You can't walk away, you can't even look away too long, and just when you think everything's going fine, your cauldron belches. Not literally, but the boil surges for a moment, rises higher than expected, and you react on instinct, lifting the heavy pot with both hands to move it off the flame. It's hot, slippery with condensation, and heavy enough to wrench your back into an opinionated knot. Margaret jumps up. "Do you need—" "I got it," you bark. You lower the cauldron onto the side hearth, letting the bubbling settle. Steam floods your face, curls your hair, fogs your eyes. You exhale. The moment passes. You did not boil over. You did not ruin the batch. Margaret claps once. "Look at you, brew mistress of the village." You bow dramatically, then crack your neck. Your aunt sniffs again. Still too much rosemary. The cauldron rests, cooling now. You watch it with the possessive pride of someone who just wrestled nature, chemistry, and family opinion, and won. The ducks shuffle back into view, sniffing at your boots, blinking lazily. Old Agnes settles beside the warm stone hearth like she owns the place, which, let's be honest, she might. You turn to Margaret. "You staying for the cool down?" She shrugs. "Depends. You got cheese?" You toss her a hunk of last week's cheddar, already sweating at the edges. She accepts it like it's gold. Outside, the light is beginning to change. Shadows stretch. The air cools. The scent of brewing lingers in the cottage, sweet, sharp, a little wild. You lean against the wall, watching the steam rise. Tomorrow you'll pitch the yeast, but for tonight you rest. You've survived the boil. Section 7. The fire has quieted to a gentle glow, just enough to keep the chill out of your bones. The wort, now golden and glossy and just shy of boiling hot, sits quietly in its clay basin. Its surface is smooth, save for the occasional bubble that breaks with a quiet pop, like the last whispers of a story being told. This is the cooling stage. You open both shutters to invite the late afternoon air, and a soft breeze rolls through the cottage, carrying the scents of damp soil, distant chimney smoke, and a faint suggestion of cow. You give the cauldron a cautious stir. Still hot, you let it sit. Meanwhile, your thoughts turn, as they always do, to the ducks. You step outside, apron flapping gently, and do a head count. 1, 2, 3, 11. That's 3 short. You squint. There's a suspicious gap in the row of waddling beaks and mud-slick feathers. Harold is there, looking as innocent as a feathered delinquent can look, but Featherbutt and the 2 little grey twins, Flick and Flack, are nowhere in sight. You try not to panic. Ducks wander. That's what they do. They wander and squawk and get stuck in barrels and occasionally break into the chapel to eat candle stubs. You check the back of the cottage first, calling out softly, clicking your tongue, shaking a wooden spoon like a wand. No ducks. You peer behind the woodpile, nothing but one judgmental toad and a basket you forgot existed. You check the barley sacks. Just weevils. No ducks. And then you hear it, a soft, rhythmic quack, quack, hiss. Your stomach drops. You move toward the sound, down past the corner of your kitchen to the cellar entrance, a slanted wooden door half sunk into the earth, with a latch that hasn't worked properly since the feast of St. Ethelfrith. You ease it open, it creaks like a coffin. And there, in the shadowy gloom of your underground pantry, illuminated by one single shaft of sunlight slipping between the floorboards above, are 3 ducks. Featherbutt is perched triumphantly atop a ceramic crock. Flick and Flack are pecking at something near the wall. Something hissing. You squint. It's a cat. Specifically, the neighbour's smug, half-wild orange tomcat curled protectively around a broken jug of spilled honey, giving the ducks the slow blink of feline indifference. You exhale, deeply. No one is dying today, you mutter, inching forward, arms outstretched like you're diffusing a feathered hostage situation. You coax the ducks out with a handful of stale oatcakes and some deeply unconvincing sweet talk. They grumble, flap, and finally waddle out in a huffy little procession like they've just staged a successful mutiny. You shut the cellar door behind them, toss the cat a crust in payment for not killing your birds, and return to the cottage. The wort has cooled, just enough. It's time for fermentation. You pour the cooled liquid into your brewing vat, a wide open-topped barrel lined with beeswax and well scrubbed with what you hope was clean rushes. The wort glistens as it flows in, golden brown, slightly viscous, leaving behind streaks on the wood that catch the late sun like syrup. Now comes the leap of faith. Yeast. There is no tidy little packet. No sterile vial, no instruction label. In your world, yeast is air. Or magic. Or, more realistically, something that lives on the wood of your barrel, in the very walls of your cottage, in the ghosts of 100 past brews whispering through the rafters. You do have a trick, though, a wooden stirring paddle carved generations ago and never once fully scrubbed clean. Its porous grain holds secrets, tiny cultures of wild yeast that cling on stubbornly, waiting. You dip it into the wort and give a slow, steady stir, clockwise. Always clockwise. The ducks gather in the doorway, watching with eerie silence. Margaret calls it the solemn quackening. You call it creepy. You lean close, breathing in. It smells different already, more complex, like something alive has just entered the conversation. Yeast is unpredictable. Some batches ferment quickly, frothing with the eagerness of a child at a festival. Others take their time, brooding like a monk with a grudge. Some get stuck halfway and have to be coaxed, cajoled, or bribed with a pinch of leftover fruit. And some never take at all. Historians still argue whether wild fermentation in the Middle Ages was primarily the result of reused brewing vessels, contaminated air, or divine intervention. You suspect it's a combination of all 3, and possibly that duck Harold rubbing against the vat when no one's looking. You cover the barrel loosely with a cloth and set it near the hearth, where the warmth will encourage the yeast to wake up and stretch. Then you wait, and wait. And wait. In the meantime, you pour yourself a mug of yesterday's batch, thin, slightly sour, but comforting. You sit in the doorway with your ducks gathered like gossiping courtiers, watching the sky turn pink and then bruise into blue. You think about your brew. Will it be drinkable? Will it turn to vinegar? Will the local taster accuse you of witchcraft again just because his eyebrows fell out? Only time will tell. For now, though, the cottage is warm, the ducks are accounted for, and the yeast is hopefully doing what yeast does best, transforming barley tea into liquid courage, one bubble at a time. You sip, sigh, and rest your head against the doorframe. The stars are coming out, and you're one day closer to beer. Section 8. By dawn, the ducks are snoring. Yes, they snore. It's not loud, it's more of a wheezy little purr, but it's unmistakable. You hear it through the cottage wall, layered under the faint crackle of cooling embers and the creak of your old brewing barrel stretching as if it too had a long night. You rise quietly, tugging your shawl tighter around your shoulders. It's cool this morning, and the hearth's gone down to glowing coals. You light a beeswax taper from the edge of the fire, shielding it from the draught, and cross over to your precious vat. You lean in. The surface is bubbling. Small, gentle bursts popping through the top like tiny hiccups from some sleepy creature. You breathe in, yes. There it is, that unmistakable scent of fermentation, sweet and sour, a little fruity, a little sweaty, and utterly alive. It smells like promise. And possibly faintly of duck, but mostly promise. The yeast has arrived. And it's feasting. You whisper a word of thanks to St. Arnold, whose wooden figure in the corner now wears a crown of barley straw you tossed on his head in a moment of beer-induced whimsy. He approves, you assume. Now begins the watch. Fermentation is a waiting game. You can't rush it. You shouldn't poke it too much, but of course you absolutely will poke it too much. You check it every few hours. In between, you deal with everything else. The neighbour's goat that somehow ended up inside your duck coop again, your cousin's toddler who walked through your mash tun while eating a beet, also again, and the endless stream of villagers who just happen to be nearby and want to know if this batch will be less cloudy than last time. Margaret stops by, holding a clump of wild rosemary like it's a bouquet. "You still got bubbles?" she asks, peering over your shoulder like a nosy squirrel. You nod. "Strong ones." She sniffs the air. "Smells like something's alive in there." You stare at her. That's literally how fermentation works. She ignores your sarcasm and sets the rosemary on your table. In case the spirit of the beer wants variety, you raise an eyebrow. The beer's a spirit now? Maybe, she grins. Historians will argue. She stays to help you strain out yesterday's herb bundles from the post-boil pot, now crusted slightly at the edges. You scrape them down, toss the spent herbs onto the compost heap, which the ducks immediately swarm, and wipe your hands on the least sticky part of your apron. Then comes the fun part. Tasting. You take a small ladle of the fermenting beer, careful not to disturb the bubbling top too much. It's still flat, still young, but you taste it anyway. The flavour's coming along, malty, herby, a little sharp. There's a note of something wild in the back, not vinegar, not sweetness. Something in between. You hand the cup to Margaret. She sips, swishes it in her mouth like she's the queen of beerland and nods. That'll do. High praise. You cover the vat again and settle back into the slow rhythm of waiting. But waiting doesn't mean resting. You still have to gather firewood, chase off the village boys trying to peek in your window for a free sip, and, not least of all, deal with your aunt. She shows up just before midday with a priest in tow. "Father wants to see the beer," she announces without explanation. The priest, a thin, anxious man with the kind of hands that suggest he's never carried anything heavier than a hymnal, smiles politely. "Just ensuring everything aligns with purity standards." You blink. "Which purity standards?" He clears his throat. "The holy ones." You glance at your vat. You do not mention that you stirred it while singing a tavern song about sheep. You certainly do not mention that you blessed it this morning by touching it with a duck feather for luck. Instead, you gesture to the vat. "Still fermenting," you say. "Should be ready in a few days." He peers in, recoils slightly at the bubbling, and murmurs something about mysterious froth. Your aunt crosses herself. You hand him a tiny sample. He sips it like it might fight back. He winces. You wait, then he nods. Acceptable. Godly enough. And with that, they leave. You flop onto your stool and groan. Margaret, from the window, raises her cup in a silent toast. By evening, you check the vat again. The bubbling has calmed slightly, which is a good sign. You stir gently, not too much, and listen. There's something about the sound of beer fermenting. It's like breathing, like something slumbering under warm blankets, slowly becoming what it's meant to be. You clean the stirring spoon, wipe down the edges of the vat, and finally, allow yourself to sit down for supper. Tonight, it's barley porridge with onions, a slice of hard cheese, and a mug of leftover beer. The ducks gather around your feet. One sits on your boot. Outside, the wind picks up, rustling the trees and carrying the faint scent of rain. Inside, the vat continues to bubble. And you sit in the amber glow of your hearth, hand wrapped around a wooden cup, feeling like you've earned this moment of stillness. Tomorrow, you'll taste the final brew. Tomorrow, you'll find out if all your stirring, boiling, waiting, and duck chasing paid off. But for now, you close your eyes and listen to the beer breathe. Section 9. You wake to quiet, not silence, never silence, but the sort of hushed calm that only arrives when the ducks are sleeping in a satisfied pile and the village hasn't yet remembered you exist. The morning light slides gently through the gaps in your shutters, painting your floor in strips of pale gold and grey dust. You move carefully today, because this is the moment when the beer has had time to become itself, when the yeast has sung its final song, the sugars are spent, and what remains is something ancient, something alchemical, the moment of cooling down. Your brewing vat sits undisturbed in the corner, wrapped in layers of linen and your oldest wool shawl, like a baby waiting to be named. You uncover it slowly, reverently. The top layer is quiet now, no more bubbling. Just a soft, frothy cap clinging to the surface, like foam on the edge of a sea dream. You lean in and breathe. Gone is the sharp tang of fermentation. What remains is mellow, earthy, warm. A scent of barley softened by fire, of herbs kissed by air, of effort turned to reward. There's a note of rosemary, still lingering like a memory. And under that, a faint, comforting musk of something brewed right. You dip a ladle, lift it carefully, and watch the amber liquid trail back into the vat in a slow ribbon. It's thick but not sluggish. Polished but not clear, you hold the ladle to the light. It glows. Now comes the first sip, and the ducks know it. They begin to gather at the threshold as if summoned by some primal force, waddling in with solemn faces and grass-stuck feathers. Harold leads the pack naturally. He positions himself at your feet like a pint-sized judge. You take a sip. It's warm, rounded, a little bitter, a little sweet, with a hint of the wood from your old mash paddle, and just a breath of something herbal and strange, probably whatever your cousin Edith added without asking. But it's good. You let it sit on your tongue. You feel it settle into your chest. This is beer, not tavern beer, not monastic beer. Not the watery stuff they sell at fairs. This is your beer. Born of burnt fingertips, stained aprons, stolen kindling, duck interference, and stubbornness. You smile. Outside, the village begins to stir. You hear the first knock of a hammer, the cry of a child, the clatter of boots on cobblestone. You don't move, not yet. First you check the duck. They're all here, miraculously. Featherbutt is preening. Flick and Flack are fighting over a piece of straw. Harold is standing on one foot, eyes closed, probably composing a sonnet. You count again just to be sure, every one of them accounted for. You take a deep breath and begin preparing for the next step. Racking. That means transferring the finished beer from the fermentation vat into something else, ideally without disturbing the sediment that's settled at the bottom. Because as much as you love barley, nobody wants a mug full of sludge. You use a wooden ladle and a series of siphoning tricks that would impress a minor alchemist. The beer flows into your clean clay basin, slow and steady, with the precision of a practiced hand. You stop every so often to let the bubbles settle, adjusting your angle, wiping the rim. It's oddly calming, this slow rhythm. Pour, pause, settle, pour. It makes you think of prayers, of lullabies, of counting ducks to sleep. Margaret appears around midday with a basket of duck eggs and a long story about her cousin's failed attempt at honey mead. "Too many bees," she says, unwrapping cheese. "They got in the vat and refused to leave." You nod sympathetically. "You've had bees. You've had spiders. Once, even a frog." You pour her a mug of the new brew. She sips, pauses, then sips again. "Stronger than last time," she says finally. "Too strong?" She grins. "Just strong enough for confession." You laugh. And for a moment, the two of you sit there, watching the ducks, sipping your beer, not worrying about whether the ale inspector will approve, or whether the neighbours will complain, or whether Harold will eat your curtains again. You just sit, and that's something By evening, the beer is cooled and resting in its new basin. You cover it again, this time with a soft cloth embroidered by your grandmother, duck feathers stitched into the corners. You give the ducks a last treat, some spent grain and a bit of sour bread. They descend on it like tiny feathered wolves. You light your lantern, the night settles in. And as you move through your quiet cottage, washing ladles, stacking logs, humming the same folk tune your grandmother sang, you realize something. You've done it. You've brewed something real. Not perfect, not elegant, but honest. And the ducks approve. At least Harold hasn't pooped in the vat, yet. Section 10. There's a particular hush that fills your cottage the morning after a successful brew, a kind of sacred stillness. Not the ductless silence of disaster or the creaky tension of failure, but a soft, contented quiet. The vat is calm, the hearth glows gently, even Harold is behaving like a feathered monk, contemplative and still. Today you wait, because today the yeast rests, the flavors settle. And you pretend you're not already thinking about that first true mug, but not yet. Now's the part where the beer just exists. Cooling, clarifying, becoming. You kneel beside the basin and lift a corner of the linen cover. The surface looks like amber glass, dull, with a few bubbles slowly meandering their way to the edges, but otherwise motionless. The scent is soft now. Less sharp, more rounded, like bread that's been toasted and left on the hearth to dream. It's time to let the beer breathe. You uncover it fully and leave the windows cracked. Outside, the air is still. Crisp. A slight breeze slides through the cottage like a polite ghost, brushing your cheek and tugging at your apron. You let it swirl through the kitchen, over the beer, and out the back door. Your grandmother used to say, "Let the air know what you've made. Let it bless the beer or scold it." You're hoping for the former. The ducks have gathered again, of course. They always know when something important is happening. Old Agnes sits nearest the basin, head cocked. Flick and Flack are sniffing the air like they're expert sommeliers. Harold is sitting on the table pretending to be an angel. You make a mental note to brush all his feathers off later. But now you leave the beer alone. Instead, you move to the side counter and begin preparing the next step, your flavouring blends, because while your base brew is good, and it is good, you've been experimenting. Tinkering, whispering ideas to your herb jars when no one's listening. Some alewives add cherries. Others, rose petals. You once tried birch bark. It worked. Sort of. Today you're going for something bold, thyme and black pepper. You crush a pinch of dried thyme leaves in your mortar, breathing in the scent, green, sharp, a little wild. Then you grind a few black peppercorns, slowly, carefully, until the scent rises warm and ticklish into your nose. You add a bit of both to a mug of the still cooling beer and sip. A pause. Then, yes, you nod, alone in your kitchen, like a woman who's just solved an equation that no one else can see. You'll keep the base batch pure, of course, for the village, for the priest, for the guild inspector who shows up twice a year with his nose permanently wrinkled, but for yourself, you'll siphon a little to the side. Just enough for a single jug, a secret jug, a personal batch. A reward. You glance at St. Arnold's wooden statue, who seems to be winking now, or maybe his paint's chipped again. Hard to say. Historians still argue whether medieval alewives customized their beer regularly or only in dire necessity. You argue that boredom is a kind of necessity. You let the beer breathe a little longer, and in the meantime you count your barrels. One is cracked, another smells faintly of pickled cabbage. A third is sealed, waxed, and probably empty, but you tap it 3 times anyway to check for rats. You find one good one, clean, dry, lined with beeswax, and marked with a faded barley symbol on the side. This one you'll use. You rinse it out again with hot water just to be sure, then with a little leftover beer. Because tradition, while it dries by the fire, you begin preparing a stopper from a strip of waxed cloth and an old cork carved from a cider press. It's not elegant, but it works, and it's survived 2 winters and 1 unfortunate incident involving a ferret. As the beer finishes cooling, you take a moment to simply be. To sit on your stool, mug in hand, watching the flicker of the fire against the wall, listening to the ducks preen and mutter, watching the wind dance with the herbs above your window. The cottage smells of thyme and barley and faint smoke. Your boots are off, your feet are up. And for the first time in what feels like weeks, your back is no longer threatening to sue you for malt-related trauma. You sip the new blend again. It's sharp, bright, with just enough kick to remind you you're still alive. You wonder what your grandmother would say. She always favoured juniper, said it scared off evil spirits and bad neighbours. Maybe you'll try that next time. Maybe. The sun shifts outside, creeping toward the treetops, casting long golden fingers across your floorboards. You stretch, pat your knee, which crackles in response, and begin preparing for transfer. Tomorrow the beer goes into barrels, tomorrow it really becomes something, but tonight you light a single candle, you pour yourself a final mug, and you raise it to the ducks. May you never drown in my brew, you murmur. They blink, nonplussed. You sip, sigh, and let the day slip into evening. The beer is ready, and so are you. Section 11, you wake with the sun, barely. Just enough of it slips through the shutters to draw a line of gold across your face, like some celestial finger reminding you that beer waits for no one, not even someone with sore legs and barley in her hair. You stretch, yawn, and do a quick count of body parts. Everything aches. That's how you know you're alive. Today is tending day. You step over 3 ducks sprawled near the hearth like spilled pillows and peer into your basin. The beer has gone still, perfectly, beautifully still. No more bubbles, no more foam, just a quiet surface that reflects your face in soft distortion, like a barley-coloured mirror. You run your finger gently through it. The top feels smooth, silky, underneath heavier now, more settled, more certain. This is the phase where care becomes the only job. No more stirring, no more boiling. No more chasing Harold off the table. That part, unfortunately, is still ongoing. You cover the basin loosely again and begin your ritual. First, clean tools. The stirring paddle, the siphon spout, the funnel made from an old horn and a belt buckle. You wash them in hot water and scrub them with a stiff brush made of twigs and hog hair, muttering the same tune your grandmother used, part lullaby, part threat. Then, check your storage jugs. You tap each one like you're checking melons, sniff inside, swish water around to chase out any lingering ghosts. One smells faintly of onions. You set it aside with a sigh and a note to give it to your cousin who likes strong flavours. The good vessels, wax-lined, bone-dry, faintly honey-sweet from past batches, you arrange on the table like honoured guests. Then taste check. This is both thrilling and slightly terrifying. You ladle out a half cup from the side, avoiding the sediment layer. The smell is mellow now, less wild, rounded by time. You sip. It's good, not heavenly. Not the best thing you've ever made, but real, honest. Slightly herbal, smooth across the tongue with that faint afterbite that says, hey, I came through fire and smoke and mold to be here. You smile, the kind of smile that starts small and ends in your chest. But you don't have long to revel, because the door swings open. It's Edith. She's holding a painted wooden carving of St. Bridget and a large empty jug. Her toddler trails behind her, dragging a duck feather and chewing on what might be your soap. You're racking today, she says. It's not a question. You nod. She sets the jug down and inspects your beer without asking. Still murky. It's not done clarifying, you mutter, which is your polite way of saying go away before I throw this horn at you. She ignores the tone. Bridget likes clear beer. Bridget likes everything. That's why she's a saint. You sigh and begin the racking process. With the care of a jeweler handling rubies, you set the siphon spout just above the sediment layer and gently tip the basin. The liquid flows, golden brown with little ribbons of light dancing in it. It spills into the jug with a musical glug 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 that fills the kitchen with joy. The ducks waddle closer, hypnotized. As it fills, you whisper a soft blessing. Nothing fancy, just a few words to St. Arnold, a promise to clean the spoon this time, and a quick no vinegar please to whatever spirits might be hovering near the rafters. You fill the first jug, seal it with wax and move to the next. Edith tries to help. She nearly drops the third one. You banish her to the duck pen, where her child promptly tries to ride old Agnes like a horse. Agnes is not amused. You finish the transfer. 5 full jugs. 1 half jug, 1 sad little bowl you'll probably drink later with a crust of bread and call it lunch. Then you move on to labelling, your favourite part. You use charcoal on wood tags, myrtle number 2, rosemary blend, plain for Father Bernard and not for Harold, though you know full well he'll knock it over anyway. The jugs rest now, lined like soldiers by the hearth, warm, satisfied, like they know they've become something. And as you clean the last sticky drip from the lip of a jug, the door creaks again. This time it's the village taster. He's toothless. Blind in one eye, smells faintly of apples and burnt feathers, but his nose is uncanny. He doesn't knock. He just walks in like he pays rent. You hand him the plain jug. He sniffs, swirls, takes a small sip. A pause, then he nods. Better than Jones, will you try not to grin? He leaves without another word. You finally sit, feet up. Spoon in hand, warm mug beside you, and it hits you. It's done. All the scraping, stirring, burning, boiling, straining, duck chasing and herb arguing, and here it is. 5 jugs of beer, 1 slightly weird cousin. 0 catastrophic failures. You watch the jugs breathe by the fire, and you feel proud. Not loudly, not the kind of pride that needs shouting, but the quiet, worn kind. The kind that comes from doing something ancient, messy, and strangely holy with your own 2 hands. You lean back, sigh, and listen to the soft murmurs of the ducks sleeping by the door. The beer is resting. And so are you. Section 12. The next morning is tasting day. Not for you. You've already tasted plenty. This day belongs to the parish taster, a man with a nose for corruption, a palate for bitterness, and exactly 0 sense of tact. And he's coming to your door. You're ready. Well, mostly. You've swept the floor, cleared the ducks from the hearth, and stacked your best mugs on the table, each one chipped in its own charming way. You've even wiped down St. Arnold's wooden statue, though he still wears a faint dusting of duck dander around the halo. You set out 2 jugs on the table, one for show, the other for pouring. The show jug has an especially lovely wax seal and just a hint of beeswax polish on the rim. The one for pouring is acceptable. You take a deep breath, and then he arrives. Old Master Elric. He's about 90, give or take a few decades, wears a tunic with more patches than cloth and a cap so flat it looks ironed by time itself. He carries a crooked staff and a small leather satchel filled with whatever it is parish tasters carry, possibly scrolls, possibly stale bread. He enters without knocking, of course, smells the room, grunts, and takes a seat at your table with the solemnity of a bishop about to judge a heretic. You pour the beer. He holds the mug up to the light, what little light there is, and peers through it like he's gazing into the secrets of the cosmos. Then he sniffs, loudly, wetly. You resist the urge to flinch. Then comes the sip, a long, contemplative drink, followed by a silence so thick even the ducks stop muttering. Finally, he smacks his lips and says, "Better than last year." You blink. "That's it?" He nods. "Last year made my teeth tingle." You open your mouth, then close it, then decide to take it as the compliment it is. He finishes the mug in 2 gulps, wipes his mouth on your clean apron, and declares it acceptable for sale. You nod, hands tight on the table. Margaret, who's been eavesdropping by the window, whispers through the crack, "That's practically an award." You allow yourself a small smile. Elric exits as unceremoniously as he entered, nearly tripping over Harold, who flaps in indignation and then proceeds to steal a sip from the tasting mug. You sigh. Then, from the back of the cottage, you hear a soft knock. It's your cousin Edith, and she's brought the parish chicken. Yes, the taster was just round 1. Now comes the unofficial folk custom tasting, the offering to the community's one-eyed chicken, lovingly called Sister Peep, who has, for reasons no one questions anymore, been tasting local brews since the plague years. She doesn't drink much. Just a few drops. You pour some beer into a chipped saucer and place it before her. She pecks once, pauses, pecks again, then walks in a tiny circle and flaps her wings. Everyone cheers. You didn't expect a parade, but this is as close as it gets. The rest of the village will hear about it by nightfall. And you, humble brewer that you are, now hold the unofficial blessing of both Elric and Sister Peep. You prepare for the next ritual, the first shared tasting. Your neighbours start trickling in. Agnes brings a loaf of onion bread. Joan contributes a chunk of dried apple cake. Margaret shows up with 6 empty mugs and a grin wide enough to split her face. You serve carefully measured mugs, watching their reactions like a hawk. One by one, they sip and nod. "Smooth," says Joan. "Herby," says Agnes. "Could use more bite," mutters Margaret, but she drinks 3 mugs, so you assume she means it lovingly. Even Father Bernard appears, quietly, wearing that same baffled smile he reserves for alewives and goose parades. He blesses the table. You pour him a small cup. He drinks, closes his eyes, and murmurs something about divine grains. You'll take it. As twilight slips over the thatched rooftops, your cottage is full of people, laughter, crumbs, and the scent of warm beer and rosemary. You sit back against the wall, mug in hand, watching Harold try to leap onto the table and get distracted halfway through. You think of all the batches before this one. The sour ones, the cloudy ones, the one that smelled like burnt leather, the one that exploded, and yet you kept brewing because this moment, it's worth every scalded finger and duck in the pantry. Historians still argue whether alewives had true influence in their communities or were simply tolerated for their necessity. You know the truth, you feed your people, you warm their evenings. You fill their stories with barley and firelight and laughter. You make something that matters, and as the candles flicker low, and the mugs grow heavy with dregs, and the ducks start to snore under the bench, you raise your cup to the air and whisper, "Next batch'll be better." Margaret raises hers too. "Next batch'll have honey." You both laugh. The night drifts in fully now, cool and quiet, and your beer. It sings softly from every satisfied stomach and flushed cheek in the room. Section 13. The next day dawns with a sky the colour of pewter, and the unmistakable sense that your cottage now smells permanently of beer, bread, and duck feathers. You stretch your arms, aching as usual, and glance toward the row of jugs lined near the hearth. 5 of them sealed and quiet. One of them, your secret thyme and black pepper blend, tucked behind a stack of firewood like a beloved contraband. Today is barreling day. Not for show, for storage, and if you're being honest, also for pride. There's something about sealing your beer in a proper barrel that makes the whole effort feel official, like you're not just surviving but participating in a long tradition of household alchemy, of transformation. But first you need to find a barrel that doesn't smell like pickled beets. You drag them out of the cellar one by one. Some are too small, some are cracked, and one has a distinct whiff of fermented fish that you really don't want to talk about. Eventually you find a good one, sturdy, dry, lined with a faint layer of beeswax from last year's honey trade. You roll it outside and rinse it with hot water, then tilt it to dry under the weak morning sun while the ducks inspect it with great suspicion. Featherbutt tries to climb in. You remove her gently. She tries again. This continues for most of the hour. Meanwhile, you prepare your siphon again, a hollowed reed stem fitted into a leather bag clamped shut with a peg made from your old comb. It works, mostly. You open the sealed jugs carefully, holding your breath until that first satisfying pop of wax release. One by one, you decant them into the barrel, watching the level rise, listening to the soft gurgle of completion. It smells right. Deep, herbal, slightly smoky from the hearth, but clean and warm. As you work, Margaret shows up, holding an onion and 3 carrots like she's about to perform a ritual. "You feeding the barrel or the ducks?" you ask. She grins. "Soup for later, but I came to witness the sealing, because yes, barrel sealing is a communal act, or at least it's become one. Ever since the incident of 74 when someone, you, sealed a barrel too soon and created the world's most dangerous beer geyser. Now you let others observe, for science. For safety, you fill the barrel 3/4 full, just enough to give the beer room to breathe, and then gently fit the wooden plug into place. You coat the seams with melted wax, the smell of bees and smoke rising into the cool air. As the wax hardens, you scratch a symbol onto the side, a barley stalk, bent just so, your mark, and then you label it in careful charcoal script, Myrtle Blend B. Alewife, St. Bridget's Week. It's a small thing, but it matters, because someday someone might drink this barrel, might taste the thyme in it, or feel the warmth from the rosemary, or get that faint aftertaste of duck-related chaos, and maybe they'll wonder who made it. You hope they'll smile. Margaret claps once. "It's official now. You're a Cooper's nightmare." You bow deeply. Together you carry the barrel back inside, set it on a cradle beside the hearth and let it rest. It'll keep for a month, maybe 2. Longer, if the priest doesn't come sniffing around for samples. You serve Margaret a mug of your special batch, the hidden one, and she raises her eyebrows. "This has bite." You sip it too. The pepper hits just after the malt, then fades into a kind of floral whisper. You both nod. Put that one in a barrel, she says. Maybe next time. Then come the odd jobs. Cleaning the siphon, scrubbing the mugs, replacing the wool under the vat. Chasing Harold out of the grain sack. Again. You think about how many times you've done this exact process with its endless stirring and steeping and duck chasing and sealing, and how it never really gets old. Exhausting, yes, but never dull, because every batch is different. Every brew tells a story. There was the wheat and weasel batch of 3 winters ago, don't ask. The ill-fated mulled surprise. The Easter ale that turned purple for unknown reasons. Each one as much a part of your life as any prayer or festival. You wonder sometimes how long people will do this, brew like this, cook like this. Tend to grain and yeast and wild herbs like they matter. Historians will argue, of course. They'll say women brewed because they had to, because water wasn't safe, because men were busy with politics or war, but you know better. You brew because it feels like something sacred, because there's power in taking fire and grain and time and making something that warms bellies and hearts. Because at the end of the day, after all the aches and burns and screaming ducks, you get to raise a mug and say, I made this. The sun begins to set, you light a lantern, and then, with a grin, you sneak your secret blend into an old wine flask, cork it tight, and write on the label in tiny letters, Private stock, do not touch. Yes, you, Harold. He stares at you from across the room, eyes glinting. You stare back and drink first. Section 14. Supper comes with a sky streaked in orange and a cottage full of tired bones and scattered barley husks. You've been bending, lifting, wiping, duck herding, wax dripping, and oat burning since dawn, and your stomach is now performing an opera in 3 growling acts. Dinner is simple, because when you've brewed beer for 3 days straight, you're allowed to skip the complicated things. You ladle out some thin onion and turnip stew, drop in 2 halves of a hard-boiled duck egg, thank you featherbutt, and slice a piece of yesterday's barley bread that's so tough it could be used as a weapon in the wrong hands. You eat slowly, sipping from your now cooled blend, the pepper dancing faintly at the back of your throat like it's warming up for a second act. The ducks are oddly peaceful tonight. Maybe they too are full of a sense of completion. Or maybe Harold finally tired himself out after his failed attempt to court one of the neighbour's geese. Either way, they're clustered around your feet, their eyes half-lidded, feathers puffed, looking like squishy, suspicious slippers. The wind rattles the shutters gently. You grab your wool cloak and wrap it around your shoulders, then pour yourself another mug. This time, the base batch, no pepper, no tricks, just beer. And it's lovely, soft, stable. Like the end of a good day. As you settle onto your stool, a knock taps at your door, rhythmic. Familiar, you open it to find 2 travellers, damp cloaks, travel-worn boots, hopeful eyes. They've clearly been on the road all day and probably heard from Margaret, because of course she told everyone, that your latest batch was worth walking a mile in the rain for. You nod them in. You don't ask for payment. Hospitality is its own kind of currency here. They offer a piece of smoked eel wrapped in linen and a small pouch of dried berries. Not bad. You pour them each a mug. They sip, eyes widen. One of them lets out a breath like he's been holding it since yesterday. The other raises the mug toward the ceiling and says, You brewed this? You nod. They nod back. Not in awe exactly, but in respect, the kind you offer to someone who's done something hard and done it well. They settle in beside the hearth, dripping quietly onto the floor, sipping slow. You tear off extra bread and toss it into the stew pot to thicken. You toss a few crumbs to the ducks. Harold makes a sound like a contented sneeze. The conversation is soft. Stories of strange markets, a blacksmith with 6 fingers and a town with a singing pig. You raise an eyebrow at that one. You don't speak much. You don't need to. You watch them sip your beer and feel something settle in your chest, something warm and steady and ancient, because this is what beer is for. Not just for trade, not just to purify questionable water or help people forget their bad luck with goats. It's for this. Warmth, story, company. It's the thing that turns a tired cottage into a haven. Historians will argue whether medieval beer was nutritious or intoxicating, whether alewives were revered or just tolerated, whether brewing was science or superstition. But none of that matters when you're watching 2 strangers melt into your old chairs, the fire crackling, the beer glowing, and the ducks softly honking in their sleep like tiny feathery lullabies. You refill the mugs. They thank you with their eyes, and for a while you all just are. Later, after the last sip and the last ember has dimmed to a faint red glow, you spread blankets near the hearth for your guests. You tuck an old sheepskin under one of their heads. You place a small wooden icon of St. Bridget on the mantel, just in case. And then, before blowing out the lantern, you sip the very last of your mug and whisper, "You did well." You're not even sure if you mean the beer, the day, or yourself. Maybe all three. You set the mug down. You check the barrel one more time, give it a gentle pat, and then you climb into bed. The wind outside hums softly through the chimney. The ducks breathe in little whistles, the guests snore gently beside the fire, and you fall asleep to the quiet knowledge that your hands made something good, that today you mattered. Section 15. The morning after a shared meal and fire-warmed ale is always a bit like waking up after a festival. Less the hangover, more the gentle ache of having lived fully the day before. You stretch under your wool blanket and listen. The travellers are still asleep, snoring in harmony. The fire has burned down to soft grey coals, and the ducks are already arguing with a bucket. Some things are eternal. You rise, pad across the chilly floor and pour yourself the last ladle of beer from yesterday's jug. It's flat now, quiet still, but not gone. You sip, and it's like tasting the shadow of a song that played all night in your dreams. Today, it's not about brewing, it's about maintaining. The beer is made, the barrels are sealed, the flavour has been judged by priest, by neighbour, by duck and man alike. Now comes the part people rarely sing about, the daily tending, the real work of an alewife, first order of business, checking for leaks. You crouch beside your best barrel and run your fingers along the base, still dry, still tight. But the little one, your not for Harold blend, has a thin line of seepage near the bottom seam. You sigh. You press a waxed rag against it, tapping it gently into place with the flat of your spoon. You mutter a soft threat under your breath, not at the beer, but at gravity in general, and lean your ear close to listen. No more dripping. Good. Outside, you hear the scrape of boots. Your travellers are leaving. You pack them a small bundle, some of your toughest bread, a half handful of pickled turnips, and a stoppered flask of beer. For the road, you say. They nod, eyes grateful. They offer you a small brass token with a sun engraved on it, some kind of good luck charm maybe, or a token from a town 2 villages east. You hang it on your wall, next to the faded herbs and the cracked spoon with a burn mark that looks like a goose. You return to the barrels. This is where the gossip happens. Because every alewife knows barrels talk, not with voices but with signs, a faint fizz at the cork. Overactive fermentation, a waxy build-up near the seam, too much headspace. A duck sleeping on the barrel, well, that probably means it's warm. You check them all. Tap them, tilt them, whisper to them. You leave the best one untouched, Myrtle blend, because it feels right and you don't want to disturb it. Then come the visitors. First it's Joan holding a cracked mug and asking casually if you've got any spares. You fill her cup. She sips. She nods, says nothing, but stands in your doorway a little longer than usual before heading home. Next, a teenager from the North Farm, pale-faced and wide-eyed, sent by his mother for a bit of the brown stuff if there's any left. You give him half a jug and a warning. Tell her this one bites. He grins like you've given him gold. Then the ale gossip begins. Word is, one of the neighbouring villages had a bad batch go sour. No one knows why. The priest is blaming sin. The alewife is blaming her neighbour's cat. You suspect they forgot to clean their tun. Margaret confirms it with a dramatic sigh as she enters, tossing down her apron and settling into your stool like she owns it. They say it foamed right out the door. Nearly drowned a chicken. You blink. She nods. The good chicken, too. You both sip your mugs in silence for a moment, in honour of the drowned. Then she leans in. You ever think about selling to the next village? You look up. You hadn't. But now the thought lingers like the scent of warm malt. Too far to haul, you mutter. Margaret shrugs. Not if we build a cart. You raise an eyebrow. We, she grins. The ducks are very interested in this idea. Historians still argue whether alewives sold outside their parishes regularly or whether brewing was purely domestic. There's little written record, just the occasional scrawled receipt or village fine for unauthorised sale. But as you sit there, surrounded by full barrels, warm mugs, and friends who never quite leave, you realize something important. Your beer travels even if you don't. It travels in stories. In shared moments. In the quiet exchange between a cold traveller and a warm hearth. It lives in the way your neighbour smiles when she takes that first sip. In the way even the ducks sleep a little deeper after a brew day. You top off Margaret's mug and pour one for yourself. Later, you'll check the wax again. Later, you'll dust the saint statue and sweep the hearth and maybe draw plans for a cart. But right now, you sit with your friend in the soft gold of afternoon, your feet bare and your hands warm, and you drink something that you made. And outside, beyond the ducks and the fence and the village with its sagging roofs and wandering cats, the world keeps turning. But in here, everything is still. Still bubbling, still steeping, still living in the hush after the storm of brewing. You lean back, lift your mug, and toast the barrels. They do not respond. But you know they feel it. Section 16. By now, the house has taken on that soft, permanent smell of roasted malt and duck down. The kind of scent that lingers in the fabric of things, aprons, bread crusts, the corner of your pillow, and reminds you that something was made here. Something good. Today is no longer about work, not in the hauling, stirring, aching sense. Today is Ale Saints' Day. It's not a real holiday, but around here it might as well be. It's the unofficial feast day when your best batch of beer is marched, through the village in a ceremonial parade of jugs, bread, feathers, and whatever relic someone remembered to borrow from the chapel. The tradition began a few decades ago, after the great four-jug incident. No one speaks of it, and now it's the most chaotic celebration this side of the harvest festival. You wake to the smell of wood smoke and distant singing. Margaret is already outside with paint-stained fingers and a small army of neighbourhood children, decorating your least cracked jug with blue swirls and gold squiggles. A duck perches inside it. "You're late," she says, not looking up. "The goose is almost dressed." You blink. "What goose?" She points. There, waddling proudly across your yard, is the village's most overfed goose, draped in what appears to be a child's tunic, a bishop's hat made from stiff linen, and a necklace of bread crusts. You sigh, deeply. Why is the goose the bishop this year? Because the pig got gout. Ah. Of course, the parade starts at mid-morning. You've got your best jug filled with myrtle blend. You've tied rosemary and sage around the handle with twine. You've given Harold a special ribbon, which he immediately chewed off, and you've consented, against your better judgment, to carry the saint relic yourself, which, for the record, is a wooden spoon that once belonged to a nun who allegedly turned a puddle into mead. You join the procession. It's not dignified. There are children throwing barley kernels into the air like confetti. There are two men with flutes playing slightly out of sync. There's a woman ringing a cracked bell every time someone takes a sip. And then there's you, alewife-in-chief, walking barefoot through the muddy lane, carrying your best beer, smiling at every passerby, and trying very hard not to step in anything warm and squishy. The beer is tasted at 3 official stops. The blacksmith's forge, he drinks it hot. The chapel steps, Father Bernard sips it, declares it sinless. And the far pasture fence, because apparently the cows deserve blessings too. At each stop, people cheer, dance, or at least nod solemnly. At the chapel, Sister Peep, the one-eyed chicken, makes a surprise appearance. She pecks at a leftover crumb near your jug and falls asleep in your shoe. High praise. As the parade rounds the square, the jug nearly empty, you feel something swell in your chest. Not pride exactly, but something older, gentler. A deep satisfaction that you've done what generations of women before you have done, created something from grain, fire, and willpower. Historians may not record your name, but they'll drink your beer, and honestly, that's a legacy too. You reach the town green where a table is laid with coarse bread, hard cheese, and an unsettling number of pickled things. The jugs are passed freely now, laughter rising with the late spring wind. Children race ducks through a rope circle. Someone starts a dance. The goose, still in bishop attire, is asleep beneath a bench. You drink, your friends drink, strangers drink, and then become less strange. You hear stories of floods and marriages and someone who claims to have seen a dancing goat. You listen, you nod. You refill mugs. By sunset, the celebration is slowing. Mugs are emptying. People are leaning against trees, heads on each other's shoulders, warm with beer and twilight. You walk back home alone, carrying your empty jug, still faintly warm. The ducks follow, drunk on barley scraps and attention. Your hands are stained with herbs. Your apron is smudged with joy. Back at the cottage, you light a candle and check the barrels. Still sealed, still sound. You whisper a soft blessing, not a prayer, not exactly. Just a thank you, to the yeast, to the grain. To the stubborn part of you that keeps doing this, year after year, you peel off your apron, brush the feathers from your bed, and slide beneath your quilt. The house creaks. The ducks snore, and somewhere out there in the quiet dark, your beer is still travelling, through memories, through bellies, through stories that will be told long after the jug is dry. And you close your eyes and smile, because today you filled more than barrels, you filled people. Section 17. The day after Ailey Saints' Day is quieter, your voice is a little hoarse, your feet are still muddy. Your apron has at least 3 new stains whose origins you cannot, and will not, trace. There's a lone crust of bread stuck to the wall, and a duck on your bed. Harold, of course. He opens one eye as you rise, stretches a wing, and does not move. You shuffle to the hearth and poke at the coals. Still warm, good. You add a few sticks, blow gently, and watch the fire yawn awake like it too had too much myrtle blend. Today is for winding down, not resting necessarily. You still have chores, always, but winding down the season of brewing. The heavy lifting is done. The fire stoking, mash stirring, barrel sealing, all tucked behind you now. What remains are the small rituals, the rituals of care. You check the barrels one by one. None have leaked. The wax holds. The wood is warm to the touch. You tap each one gently with the heel of your hand, listening, feeling. A brewer's intuition. Myrtle blend is resting perfectly. No bloating. No hiss, just the slow, dignified quiet of a beer aging into its best self. You wrap a strip of linen around the plug as added insurance. Then you sit beside it, sipping a bit of yesterday's leftovers, and you breathe. The ducks file in slowly. Even they're moving slower than usual today. Old Agnes gives a half-hearted flap before curling up beside your stool. Flick and Flack settle near the pantry door. Harold returns to your bed, leaving a single perfectly shaped feather as tribute. The day stretches before you like a long, well-earned nap. But first, you take a walk. You carry a small, stoppered jug, your personal blend sharp with pepper and thyme, and head down the muddy lane to the edge of the barley field. The stalks are still low, the earth damp, but you can already feel the season shifting. You pour a splash at the field's edge, a gesture. Not quite superstition, not quite science, just something you do. A thank you for the grain, for the ducks, for the days when the wind didn't blow smoke into your eyes. Historians might call this ritual quaint, or silly, or forgotten, but you call it necessary. You return home to clean the tools. The siphon is rinsed and hung near the fire. The mash paddle is scrubbed with sand and dried herbs. You rub beeswax into the cracked handle like it's a sacred relic. And it is. This spoon has stirred every brew since you first took over from your grandmother. Its handle is worn smooth where her hand used to grip it. You run your fingers along that same groove, thinking of her crooked smile and the way she always hummed when she boiled the wort. You hum too now, softly. Out of habit, out of memory, you put everything back in its place. The barley sack in the corner, the herb bundles rehung by the window, the apron, now almost entirely the colour of ale, folded on its peg. You sweep the floor, you wash your face in cool water, you pat the ducks on their feathery heads. And you sit, just sit, no one knocking. No barrels boiling, no arguments about rosemary ratios or saintly chickens, just the fire. The beer, the stillness. You raise one final mug to your lips. You sip, it's mellow now, no sharpness. Just warmth, roundness, a slight sweetness that wasn't there before. Beer ages like people into something softer and more complex. You smile, because so do you. And now the brewing is done. The fire crackles softly. The barrel breathes in the corner. The ducks are all accounted for, tucked into their straw nests, feathers puffed, their soft, rhythmic snores blending with the night wind as it brushes against your shutters. Your hands are clean, your apron is folded. Your body, though sore in all the usual places, feels the kind of ache that only comes from effort well spent, and here in the soft candlelight of your quiet cottage there is peace. the peace of knowing that from grain and water, heat and time, something beautiful was born. Something simple, yet powerful, something that brings people together, that fills mugs and bellies and hearts. Outside, the stars scatter across the sky like oats spilled on the barn floor. You stare up at them through the window, feeling smaller than the sky, but not forgotten by it. You take a slow breath. Let your shoulders drop, let your eyes soften. Tomorrow, the world will return with its noise and needs. There will be firewood to chop, barley to check, ducks to chase. Again, but tonight you did well. You made something honest, and that's more than enough, so pull your blanket up tight. Let the coals glow low, let your breath match the rhythm of the sleeping ducks beside you. You've earned this rest. You've earned this silence, let it carry you gently now, into sleep.